Well, if the 1973 race was my favorite, this one was certainly not. It was good to see all the old crew again at Newport, this race starting in fog, as they sometimes did. We knew the crew, we knew where we were going, we knew what we were up to. And at the skipper's meeting, there'd been optimistic talk of strong winds, which might help us set a course record, which was, after all, what multi-hulls were all about, sailing fast. We wanted a good wind. We wanted a chance to strut our stuff. Good to have a bottle of wine on board, and my cousin Gregory Williams was part of the crew this time. I recall this very well. The overcast skies say there's a whale. You know, we hit a whale one night going very fast, a big thump. And once when I was on watch alone, sitting in the cockpit, a whale surfaced right beside me in the darkness and blew a great towering geyser of bad-smelling spray that scared the living daylights out of me. Greg was a good guy. We were a good crew. We felt experienced. Our seasick remedy of hot pepper flakes seemed to be working. And then the wind turned. It clocked or backed until it was right on the nose. And it began to build and build. 20 knots, that's fine. 25 knots, okay. 30 knots, that blows the spume off the top of the waves. And the waves were building in size until they were pretty big. 35 knots, the skies more overcast. The days began to pass more slowly, 4 on and 4 off, clinging to the boat, trying to sleep, not looking at each other because we knew, after 2 days of this, going nowhere, a decision was going to have to be made, and my father called a meeting.
You fellas can handle this thing any way that you want to. I'm not going to make any rules.
I'm just saying it's possible.
And I say it's not possible.
I don't understand you people.
12 men with the smell of violent death in their nostrils.
You're a sadist.
12 men turned into 12 clawing animals.
Give them out! Give them!
In the end, it was unanimous, of course. We had to turn back. We were making 90-degree tacks. We weren't going anywhere. We couldn't keep the bow up into the wind. We were tuckered out, and the boat had taken a bad pounding. Of course, as soon as you turn around in a boat under these conditions, the enemy becomes your friend, and we started scooting home at 15 or 20 knots down those same seas that had opposed our progress toward Bermuda. But it wasn't a good feeling. That first afternoon, I don't think we spoke 10 words to each other. For the first time in a couple of days, we were able to eat something, sit back without holding on, without clinging to something. It rained like the devil, and it took us a couple of days to get back, and then we had to get on an airplane and fly to Bermuda because our families were already there waiting for us, the triumphant, conquering heroes who were going to sail into Hamilton. We'd rented a great cottage with its own natural swimming pool. And there our families were when we arrived. Suntanned, the little kids laughing, "Hi, Daddy." The water taxi running on time to our little island. Everything as it should be. A family reunited in paradise. That there was something wrong. We'd flown there in an airplane. Something had to change. My father knew what it was. It was going to be a new boat by Richard C. Newick. This one was a 38-foot native class, I think Dick called them. It had more compound curves than Try Me. He called it Let's Go. It had solar panels and all sorts of innovations. We managed to break the daggerboard in half, going fast and hitting a reef, I think. But we had on board the boat builder, Damian McLaughlin, one tough hombre from Cape Cod, who had built this very boat with his own hands. There was nothing that could break that he couldn't fix. Once again, the fleet was more sophisticated than ever, and you could see Dick Newick's design ideas everywhere on the dock. That's his Atlantic Proa, a very innovative boat, based directly on a Polynesian concept. And the accommodations for the crew were a manhole cover. You could see the compound lines of these boats reflecting what seemed to work. There's the designer himself, Newick, surveying his children and giving sage-like advice. Phil Weld had a new boat. As usual, a Newick design, as usual, a giant beauty. You remember Phil Weld from Part 1 in his great boat Gulfstreamer? Well, after that race, he started off transatlantic with his friend and was flipped in the Gulf Stream by a rogue wave. These two guys lived in the upturned hull for almost a week before they were finally rescued. The boat was a total loss, turned up in a Russian freighter on the other side of the Atlantic. Phil came back to Newick and said, "I want a new boat." And he had a name all ready for it, Rogue Wave. This boat's from Guadalupe, reflecting what I suppose is the new international standard of multi-hull racing, which we take for granted today. Also, the class of attractive females seemed to go up a few notches, along with the attractiveness of the boats. This creature is a Newick Val, 31 feet long. Mike Birch sailed her in the single-handed transatlantic race and came in second. The boat who beat him was 73 feet long. You wonder why these boats have bright colors? It's because we learned that if you've been turned upside down in the middle of the ocean, it's much easier to find a yellow hull than a white one. They sailed faster and better on every point of sail. Some of the initial design issues had been resolved. Now we had solar panels and a trickle charger and better radios. What we didn't have was a sliding hatch. To get down below, you just grabbed the top of the cabin house and swung through a hole. Didn't want any breaking seas knocking your hatchway away. We got to Bermuda mighty fast this time. You could see Spitboy in the distance. Always a grand feeling. Waiting our turn to go through Town Cut after some enormous ocean liner came out filled with people waving and taking pictures of these folks on these funny-looking boats. Spitboy. It looks like we entered in a rain squall. This must be St. George's. This must be a celebration. I think this was the race we placed third out of 28 boats, the best we'd ever done. By 1983, a lot of things had changed. For one thing, we were older. We were more experienced. The boats had already made another generation leap toward efficiency, beauty, more curves than ever. Let's Go was now a tried and true competitor. Great racing boat. I was on the Washington Post at that time. My own sailing experience had increased a lot. I'd campaigned my laser. Larry Brody and I had campaigned soling US 660 for the 1980 Olympics, which were canceled. I'd been in the Saucy. I'd been on Tenacious with Ted Turner when we won the 1979 Fastnet race. But to be back with the family on a fast try, knowing what we were doing now, was always the best. That's Paul, my father's great friend. We'd learned a thing or two that was subtle. These races were 3, 4, 5 days long. But when you looked at the standings afterwards on corrected time, even though you rarely saw another boat on the horizon for the whole race, some of the finish times were only a few hours apart. And once on corrected time, we beat another boat by 2 minutes. So that changed everything. No slacking off. On night watches, change sails as whenever you can. Keep your eye on the compass. Worry about the currents. Keep alert. Don't slack off. Press on, because only a few minutes might separate you from the unseen boat on the horizon. And if they were working and you were sleeping, they would win. There were calms and rain squalls and wonderful runs. I think this boat was more comfortable than the others. When she really got going, when conditions were right, it was extraordinary. Here we are going 11 knots to windward at sea. That's pretty good for any boat. The spray hit the helmsman's face so hard under these conditions that we used to bring up a scuba diving mask just so the helmsman could see the compass. Otherwise, you couldn't keep your eyes open. But it was great fun, and of course, it was what we'd come for. To eat, well, under these conditions, you found a corner, put your back to the wind, held on, and shoveled something into your face, and if it was hot, all the better. Eating out of a frying pan was considered the absolute height of subtlety. Look at the way these boats sailed. With the reef end blasting along, solar panels trickling. Why, it was almost like water skiing. We're in twin headsails now, probably changed up from a Jenny. Would change back as soon as the wind dropped a bit. Blasting across the ocean. My only regret is that there had to be an outboard motor that you could see in all the movies. We didn't plow, we skimmed. And she could stand up to rain squalls pretty well. Wouldn't even call the other watch. We can handle this. On Tenacious, we had a crew of 21 and 9-man watches. On this crew, the watch was 2 guys. Get up there and change headsails, Jeff. Hey, okay, man, all right. Meanwhile, you did the kind of let's go dance in the seaway, held on, swayed back and forth in a kind of rhythmic offshore samba. And it's also the way you slept. You crawled into your bunk, grabbed onto something with every appendage, and went to sleep holding on for dear life. I think we had Loran by this point, which made navigating a little easier, although you still needed a bucket to puke in if you went back into the after cabin to work out the sums. Spit Boy. Once inside, you went through Town Cut, where the line goes. You sailed down the side of Bermuda to Grassy Bay, made a nice turn up into Hamilton Harbor, and found yourself at the Royal Hamilton Amateur Dinghy Club. But first there was that nice 20-mile trip. We used to gather inside the harbor at St. George's when people had finished, because nobody really had an engine. We'd hook up together for a long tow. That's Damian McLaughlin, who had his own boat now, built with his own hands in his Cape Cod shop. I think those are comets through the racing dinghies. Our race was over. It was day sailing again. And although I've said it a lot of times, there's nothing like sailing in Bermudian waters. Next to Damian and Heather Kay, a long tack keeping blasting along just for the fun of it, always racing. We knew we weren't Polynesians just because we had a suntan, but we did feel a kinship with them over the millennia. Like them, we knew there was an island waiting for us somewhere over the horizon, and our job was to get there, and get there fast, and get there we did.